Johnny Carson was the unrivaled master of late-night television for 30 years, and he was famous for his charisma, humor, and sincere admiration for gifted comedians. Countless careers were established by Carson's nod and invitation on the sofa, including those of Robin Williams and Joan Rivers. However, despite his immense success, Carson never shared his comedy with Jerry Seinfeld. With Carson's stamp of approval, the golden age of television was complete. A simple okay from Johnny might catapult a previously unknown comedian into the stratosphere of fame in an instant. But Carson, who was a member of the most influential family in show business, secretly despised the man who would become the highest-paid comedian on television. Even though millions of Americans looked forward to Seinfeld's Thursday night visits, the man responsible for creating late-night television couldn't tolerate him. One of the most intriguing unspoken feuds in Hollywood is about to be revealed today. The icy feud between the most influential figure in television and the comedian who professed to make a show about nothing. What could have made Carson so hostile towards a major talent in the comedy industry? Was it a business matter, an interpersonal one, or something sinister? When the cameras stop rolling, the answer exposes a lot about the entertainment industry and the individuals involved. If you watch this film all the way to the end, you'll know why the guy who launched the careers of so many comedians never gave Seinfeld his okay. That's more important than you might believe. If you want to know the horrifying truth about this Hollywood Cold War, you have to stay with me. Call me Jerry Seinfeld. 1 Jeannie Steinman. Yeah, I know. Seinfeld's romance with Shoshana Lowenstein, who is 17 years old. For Jerry Seinfeld, the year 1993 was the pinnacle of his stardom. Thursday nights were all Seinfeld. At 38 years old, he possessed more influence in Hollywood than the majority of performers could ever hope to achieve, and critics praised him as a comic genius. Shoshana Lowenstein, a 17-year-old student at the famous Dalton School, was someone he met in Central Park at that time. A relationship that started as a random meeting soon became a national scandal. The two were often photographed in intimate settings, despite Seinfeld's claims that they were only acquaintances until Shoshana turned 18. Even though they were 21 years apart in age, she couldn't legally drink as he was getting close to 40. It seemed as if Seinfeld didn't care that people were uncomfortable. Johnny Carson found this to be completely unacceptable. Some things were too traditional for him. According to a TV source who worked on the last years of The Tonight Show, he had established himself as an entertainer who could be trusted by parents and who embodied a specific social class. It was tacky, not inappropriate, for a middle-aged man to date a high school student, in his opinion. Reportedly, Carson, who was in his late 60s and nearing the end of his career, flat-out refused to bring up Seinfeld's relationship during his show. After a joke about the marriage backfired during Seinfeld's monologue, he subtly told his writers to cut out any more references to his private life. An ex-NBC executive who was close with Carson noted that Johnny could tolerate many things, but a 38-year-old dating a youngster wasn't one of them. He was born into a time when famous people had to follow specific unspoken standards when they dated someone as young as your daughter. No one could have broken them more than a high school student. The disturbing nature of the relationship was noticed even by major outlets. The cover story of People magazine was headlined "The Graduate," a nod to the 1967 film in which a middle-aged woman woos a young man fresh from college. Newsweek pointed out the shoddiness of the connection and wondered why someone as successful and mature as Seinfeld would pursue a young woman. The harm to his reputation in some circles had already been done when Seinfeld and Lowenstein eventually broke up after 4 years of being together. On Johnny Carson's show, Seinfeld had shown that he was not a gentleman in a world that still cared about propriety, class, and ethics. Carson casually mentioned Seinfeld in a rare interview after retiring, saying, "The subtext was impossible to miss. Whatever the guy does, think, oh well, he's a cab driver." This was years after leaving the show. He's got it figured out, I swear. You should learn to think independently. Behind his iconic grin and "what's the deal?" catchphrase, Seinfeld's haughtiness and indifference were on full display. Reportedly, the real Jerry Seinfeld was drastically different from the one that Americans enjoyed seeing on television every week. Even though millions of people related to his observational comedy, his co-workers characterized him as clinical, uninvolved, and frequently disregards other people. In contrast, Carson was well known for his sincere gratitude towards those who had a hand in making his show a reality. Johnny, despite his enormous star power, would take the time to get to know the stagehands, inquire about their families, and generally be a really nice guy. Carson had a very level head despite having achieved the peak of television stardom. An old Tonight Show producer remarked that Johnny always kept in mind that TV was a team sport. She went on to collaborate with Seinfeld. He was cognizant of the fact that the quality of work performed by hundreds of individuals was critical to his success. Conversely, Jerry seemed to think that his very presence was a favor to everyone around him. Backstage, the difference in approach between the two men became obvious when Seinfeld made an appearance on The Tonight Show. While Seinfeld was punctual, well-prepared, and professionally impeccable, he kept what one crew member described as an invisible wall between himself and the rest of the crew, hardly showed appreciation, and seldom engaged with them. Carson paid attention. Although Carson admired Seinfeld's sincerity and humility, his behavior stood out for being cold and distant, especially considering that he had entertained thousands of celebrities over his 30-year tenure. As one former Tonight Show writer put it, Johnny enjoyed comedians with several facets. Of all things, he loved a good joke, but he also thought it was important to be genuine, humble, and funny. At least Jerry was clever. Not at all. When Seinfeld nonchalantly belittled other comics, including Carson favorites David Letterman and Jay Leno, for attempting too hard to connect with fans at a round-table discussion about comedy, this became brutally obvious. In the green room, people noted Carson's forced smile, while the audience chuckled at Seinfeld's customary snark. According to one eyewitness, although everyone in the crowd was laughing, nobody in the green room said a word. Everyone was aware that Johnny despised that style of speech. The idea that one's abilities should be able to speak for themselves was central to Carson's business model. He saw a lack of confidence rather than self-congratulation and disdain of peers as indicators of insecurity. Even though Seinfeld had managed to stay out of trouble in the television industry for 30 years, his attitude towards his co-workers seemed excessively confrontational. The hallmark of an exceptional comedian, according to Johnny, is performing at two separate but related events, one in Vienna, Virginia on August 25th and another in August 16th to 18th. Comedian Garry Shandling recalled Jerry Seinfeld years later and said that other comedians wanted to be around them. It wasn't always like that with Jerry. Carson cherished humility. Money was something Seinfeld flaunted. Their views on money and achievement were one of the few things that showed how much apart Carson and Seinfeld were. Johnny Carson lived in relative modesty by Hollywood standards, despite accumulating a fortune estimated at over $300 million throughout his broadcasting career. His public character was never centered on his enormous fortune, and he gave quietly and lived an unobtrusive life. Johnny never spoke about his lavish lifestyle, which included expensive cars and mansions, as his longtime producer Peter LaSalle said. He despised such type of thing. He believed that showing off one's wealth was the surest way to alienate one's audience. But Seinfeld's immense fortune became an integral part of his post-sitcom persona. He became famous for his legendary collection of over 100 Porsches. Traveling by private jet became second nature to him. He was very forthcoming in talks about his $100 million yearly salary from Seinfeld syndication. Instead of trying to hide his wealth, Seinfeld appeared to take pleasure in it, basing entire series like comedians in cars getting coffee around his collection of expensive cars. Carson despised this method because it exemplified all that was wrong with contemporary celebrity culture. Although he spent his formative years in Nebraska during the Great Depression, Carson never lost his Midwestern perspective on financial matters. He became the most paid TV artist in history after a fierce negotiation with NBC, but he thought it was bad taste to talk about money in public. An ex-staff member of The Tonight Show revealed that Johnny once told one of our writers, "You don't get funnier as your garage gets bigger." Comedy, in his view, was born out of everyday life's struggles and observations. He simply shook his head in disapproval upon learning about Jerry's extensive automobile collection and incessant boasting about his riches. A comedian's fixation with wealth seemed almost repulsive to Carson's contemporaries in the entertainment industry. All three of Carson's favorite greats, Jack Benny and Bob Hope, came from modest backgrounds and kept an approachable, everyday charm even after reaching the pinnacle of their careers. For Carson, The source of great comedy was the link to everyday life. As a sign of the evolving entertainment industry, Carson found Seinfeld's approach strange, in which famous people's wealth became an integral aspect of their reputation. Although younger viewers may have admired Seinfeld's lavish lifestyle, Carson saw it as a separation from the individuals who had contributed to his success. When you start to act like you're living in a dream, the audience will notice. Even Carson's comedic timing wanes after that. He told his longtime sidekick Ed McMahon, "Just know that you're wealthy. There is no higher form of criticism for someone whose sense of humor is paramount. This is me. We are all present. Here you are. See the significance of that." Why? Because the format of Carson's chat show was parroted by Seinfeld. Johnny Carson spent 30 years honing the chat show format that will be used by many hosts in the future. Everything from the monologue to the couches, desks, and interviews. These ingredients were transformed into an art form by Carson, who laid the groundwork that Letterman, Leno, and innumerable others would follow. Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, Jerry Seinfeld's 2012 interview series, was positioned by Seinfeld as a critique of Carson's formula and a fresh take on celebrity chats, which Seinfeld deemed antiquated. According to Seinfeld's repeated promotional statements, he has little interest in interviewing performers about films he has not seen. This insincere interest and passion is not something I care about. For that reason, no show is worth doing besides comedians in cars. You're not dreaming. Insiders in the industry understood the connotation even though Seinfeld never named Carson. The old-fashioned talk show, innovation and legacy with Carson, was fake, out of date, and not worth a genuine comedian's time. According to Carson's longtime buddy, who kept in touch with him after retirement, Johnny took that personally. This man, who relied on The Tonight Show to support his career, essentially called Johnny's whole body of work into question, calling it fraudulent and phony. It irritated him, of course. Reportedly, Carson was hurt by Seinfeld's callous disregard for the format he had devoted his life to crafting. He is infamously sensitive to slights and fiercely protective of his legacy. The chat show was more than simply entertainment for Carson. The format, which has guided the nation through assassinations, wars, scandals, and victories, was a nightly chat with America. The talk show, Johnny thought, was the American town square, as an NBC official stated. He was quite serious about the task. It was all just superficial nonsense, Jerry said, and that hurt Johnny and everyone else who had invested so much in the format. The criticism was especially hurtful because Carson had given Seinfeld a major break when he was first starting out. The Tonight Show was a major factor in Seinfeld's rise to fame, as it was for many other comedians of his time. A lot of Carson's supporters thought it was rude, if not downright rude, to suddenly reject that same format. I suppose Jerry doesn't understand that without talk shows, he would still be playing in Long Island pizza parlors, because Carson supposedly replied with his trademark subtle wit when asked about Seinfeld's remarks after his retirement. Despite Carson's signature twinkle, the comment nonetheless managed to expose the true pain concealed beneath the humor. Alternatively, you might insert the plug into the hole, that would get rid of the donut, the hole, and the plug. I'm not even sure why I feel safe stating it. The shallowness of Seinfeld's emotional core. Comedians from many walks of life were featured on Johnny Carson's show over his 30 years on television. Richard Pryor's unfiltered confessional comedy about race, addiction, and inner issues was something he wholeheartedly supported. George Carlin was embraced by him. His criticism of society prompted listeners to doubt established norms and power structures. Despite her delirious exuberance, Robin Williams's pain and sensitivity shone through, and he cherished her for it. In order to make others laugh, these Carson favorites were not afraid to show their humanity, imperfections, hardships, and weaknesses. True comedy, in Carson's view, was about more than just making a remark. It was about establishing rapport. The complete antithesis of this strategy was embodied by Seinfeld. Politics, emotions, suffering, and self-disclosure were all firmly shunned in his comedic work, as he ruefully admitted. "I could care less about how you feel," he said in an interview once. Funny things pique my interest. All of Carson's admirations for comedians were severely undermined by this intentional lack of depth. Carson acknowledged Seinfeld's technical proficiency and obvious talent, but he felt the show lacked the complexity that distinguished real art from comics. It was Johnny's belief that humor should elicit laughter, but he also believed that great comedy should evoke other emotions. A longtime Carson confidant explained the sensations of recognition, embarrassment, and relief. He was impressed by Jerry's skill, but he believed Jerry only dealt with the surface level of reality in his comedy. Comedic relief wasn't merely a means to an end for Carson, who had endured highly publicized divorces, his son's death, and his own struggles with drink, but rather a means to transcend these challenges, giving them new life so that they can alleviate loneliness for others. Carson saw Seinfeld's method as a lost chance because of its intentional evasion of emotional weight. "I'm not here to lecture you or broach any serious cultural topics," Seinfeld once remarked. "I'm not involved." This statement exposed a basic ignorance of the power of comedy, according to Carson, who thought it was precisely what the best comedians performed. During his own last months on Earth, Carson allegedly told a friend that George Carlin never took the easy way when he passed away in 2008. "In the midst of your laughter, he provoked thought." In comedy, that's the difference between having fun and actually making an impact. Even though Carson wasn't referring directly to Seinfeld, his friends and family caught on to the analogy he was making. There were comedians, in Carson's opinion, who shed light on the human condition via their platforms. Furthermore, Carson believed that technically gifted performer Jerry Seinfeld had taken the easy way out. An illuminating contrast, the Carson-Macdonald link. Even before he passed away in 2005, Johnny Carson had already chosen Norm Macdonald to be his comedic heir apparent. Carson allegedly told close associates that Norm Macdonald was the only comic who reminded him of himself, which was the highest compliment the king of late night could give, even though he hardly remarked on comics after retiring. One of Carson's longtime friends, who had stayed close to him in his later years, said that Johnny sensed something unique in Norm. From Jack Benny and beyond, he believed Norm was continuing a long line of comics. Uncompromising, dry, and methodical, Johnny recognized the continuation of a lineage that was very important to him when he watched Norm. Unlike Carson's feelings towards Seinfeld, this bond between Macdonald and Carson is very strong. Jerry stood for accuracy and polish, while Norm personified the courage and honesty that Carson cherished. Carson admired daring comedians who would risk failure in order to be authentic to their individuality. Despite how well it described Macdonald, the description appeared to conflict with Seinfeld's methodical approach. Comedians of many ages paid tribute to Macdonald after his death in September 2021 from a secret 9-year cancer battle. From Conan O'Brien to Adam Sandler, via David Letterman. But Jerry Seinfeld was noticeably absent from the conversation. Many saw Jerry's total lack of acknowledgement, not even a token tweet or statement, as a purposeful rejection of a comic whose dedication to the craft exemplified everything Seinfeld stood for, even though no one had anticipated Jerry to fake a friendship. An experienced comedian who had guest spots on Seinfeld and The Tonight Show noted that if Johnny were still alive, that quiet would have meant a lot to him. It would have validated his preconceived notions about Jerry's personality. The fact that Macdonald had made an appearance on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee in 2017 on Seinfeld made the quiet all the more noticeable. In their chat, Norm had shown Carson the same refreshing candor and original perspective that had won Carson over all those years ago. Despite this, Seinfeld made no public statement regarding their friendship or Norm's impact on humor upon Macdonald's passing. This absence further solidified the view of Carson's devoted fans that Seinfeld lacked the selflessness and reverence for comedy's heritage that had garnered Carson immense industry acclaim. The fact that Seinfeld didn't say anything to the comic heavy hitters for so long just served to solidify a storyline about Jerry that had been developing for decades, even though younger viewers may not have noticed or cared. The way a comedian talks about other comedians is a good indicator of their character, Johnny remarked. According to Carson's ex-producer, Jerry's lack of response said it all. Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld's chasm is about more than simply their clashing personalities. It's about the titans of television itself. It symbolizes a sea change in American entertainment, from the golden age of television with its emphasis on common cultural experiences under Carson to the era of Seinfeld's unique appeal and splintered audiences. It was felt by Carson's age that popularity brought obligations to one's art and audience. Thank those who had a part in your achievements. He had philosophical as well as personal objections to Seinfeld's method. I saw a new type of famous person embodied in Seinfeld. Extremely successful, yet spiritually secluded. Technically gifted, but emotionally distant. The fact that both guys were incredibly successful despite taking very different approaches is what makes their silent rivalry so intriguing. Carson became America's most trusted guy after dominating late night for 30 years. Many believe Seinfeld's sitcom to be the best of all time, and he became rich at a rate that Carson could never have dreamed of during his prime. Despite his success, Seinfeld was never granted Johnny Carson's blessing, the one thing that may have been most important in the comedy world. Carson saw Seinfeld as an alien to the most holy traditions of comedy, even if he, like countless lesser talents, received that career-making invitation to the couch following his stand-up appearances. Perfect in every way, but lacking in one crucial area. Carson may have said it best when he told a buddy in retirement, "There are comedians who make you laugh until you cry." This may have been the last word on their silent competition. Comedians may be both funny and thought-provoking. On top of that, they do both. I still haven't gotten Jerry to provoke some thought in me. Our job as spectators is to decide which method has been more successful throughout the years. Carson's kind, welcoming manner that seemed to include every single American in the evening chat, or the dispassionate, icy take on life's inconsequentialities that Seinfeld is known for. With each passing year, Carson's portrayal of comedy as a unifying force seems like a relic of a bygone America, especially in this age of growing separation and isolation. Click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more insights into the golden age of entertainment. If you appreciated this deep dive into one of the most intriguing silent feuds in Hollywood, leave a comment below comparing Carson and Seinfeld and letting us know which comedian style you prefer. We would also love to hear your suggestions for future Hollywood feuds. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll be back next time with more tales from the days when television was a common cultural phenomenon.